It is the beginning of the end for another chapter with the 8th Doctor, as in today's Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review, I'm going to be taking a look at the 4th and final box set from the Ravenous quadrilogy series, starring Paul McGann as the 8th Doctor, alongside Hattie Morahan as Helen Sinclair, Liv Chenka as portrayed by Nicola Walker, and of course Mark Bonnard as the 11. I've been reviewing this series for the past 2 years, and it has been thoroughly exciting all the way throughout the journey. Of course, very much like Doom Coalition, this series does have an overarching theme, having a plot arc that is spread throughout all the 4 box sets within this series, but also at the same time, this series has been a little bit more relaxed to Doom Coalition, having a few stories in there that are also standalone, and it kind of goes back to the more traditional Doctor Who sci-fi roots. So naturally, I've certainly enjoyed this series a lot more than Doom Coalition, and I was very excited to see how this series was going to come to its climax, and now with the release of Ravenous Form, we finally get a little bit of closure. So first off, and as always, in the description below there will of course be the link to go and buy this release from the Big Finish website. It is currently out now at the pre-order price. The physical box set is £22.99 and the download is £19.99, and naturally at the end of November 2019 it will be going up to the standard recommended retail price of £40 for the physical box set and £35 for the downloads. I certainly recommend picking up this box set in the next few weeks in order to save a little bit of money. And naturally, if you are interested by what I say throughout this review, you can also check out all the story details, casting information, as well as the trailer, all of which are available on the Big Finish website. So of course this series has been a little bit of an unusual one, because although it is completely disconnected to Doom Coalition and we do have a completely new plot arc, there is also at the same time a few plot arcs from the Doom Coalition series that have kind of been brought across to the Ravenous box sets. Of course we have the whole origin of the 11 that's been explored throughout the Doom Coalition series, and this series has kind of gone and developed that. We now have more stories with the 11, even him joining the actual TARDIS team, which is also seen throughout this box set. So meaning at the same time, even though this is a conclusion to Ravenous, in many ways it is also a final conclusion for Doom Coalition as well. Meaning that if you have been listening to this series since its very beginning with Doom Coalition 1, I do believe that you have now listened to around 32 hours of back knowledge and context in order to listen to this box set release. So it is certainly one for the dedicated Big Finish listener, and if you haven't picked up on the previous box sets so far, I definitely recommend checking out those ones before buying this release, because without those prior stories, this box set will make absolutely no sense whatsoever. So of course, very excitingly, this box set is a very masterful one, because we have a reoccurring theme of many different incarnations of the Master being seen throughout this box set, starting off with Geoffrey Beevers as of course the Decayed Master in the earlier episodes of this box set, and then we do of course also have the series finale featuring Derek Jacobi as the War Master, alongside Eric Roberts as the Master from the 8th Doctor movie, as well as Michelle Gomez as Missy. So very unusually and a little bit similar to that of Doom Coalition, if you are a fan of the new series, this box set kind of has an incentive to draw you in because Missy is involved, so it is a rather exciting idea, and one of which that I think works very well. However, that said, even if you are drawn in, you need to listen to the previous 30 or so hours beforehand, so it is a little bit of a dedicated hook-in, to say the least. So taking a look at how this box set pans out, as per usual we do have 4 episodes within this box set, and unlike the other box sets that we've had within Ravenous, all 4 of these stories are linked in a way to the overall plot arc. Of course within the previous box sets we've had a few standalone adventures in there. This box set is the most dedicated to the actual theme itself than all of the other box sets, which is something that you do come to expect from this series finale box set. So starting off with episode 1, we have Whisper, as written by Matt Fitton. Episode 2 is Planet of Dust, also written by Matt Fitton. And then the final 2 episodes of this box set are Day of the Master, as both written by John Dorney, which is essentially a 2-part story. So very much like some of the previous 8th Doctor box sets, we do in fact only have 2 Big Finish writers penning the entirety of this box set, meaning that it does certainly give the impression of it being one big grand story, as opposed to 4 separate adventures. Briefly briefly taking a look at the production credits on this box set, because as per usual, and much like all the other 8th Doctor box sets that I've reviewed, I think I pretty much say this in every single review, the 8th Doctor era box sets do have this brilliant sense of being incredibly cinematic and large in its scale. It's almost like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but the Doctor Who equivalent to that, and I think that they do a very good job of creating this cinematic atmosphere in the audio drama format as opposed to visually. So starting off, we have the cover art as created by Tom Webster. The director, as per usual, is Ken Bentley. The executive producers are Nicholas Briggs and Jason Haigh-Ellery. The music itself has been created by Jamie Robertson. The producer is David Richardson. The script editor is Ken Bentley. And the sound design has been created by Benji Clifford. A prior warning before we move on to the actual stories themselves, I will be including some mild spoilers throughout this review, much like how I have done within the previous box sets as well. Therefore, if you are somebody who doesn't want to hear anything about the actual plot arc itself, do not watch this review. I do apologise, maybe come back after you've listened to the box set itself, but I think especially within the context of the 8th Doctor Adventures, it is very difficult to review something spoiler-free, especially when it is a 16-part epic such as Ravenous, such as Doom Coalition, and such as Dark Eyes. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first episode of this box set, being Whisper, as written by Matt Fitton. So very much like the previous box sets within the Ravenous series, the opening episode, being Whisper, is quite a standalone story. Even though it is relating to the overall plot arc itself, it does feel like quite a detached episode compared to the other 3 stories within this box set, and it does a very good job of effortlessly intertwining the plot from Ravenous 3 into Ravenous 4. It is pretty much continuing on directly from that story. Of course, we do have the TARDIS team of the 8th Doctor, Helen, Liv, and of course the 11, who is now feeling a little bit different compared to how he has been within the previous box sets. Of course, as we all know, the 11 is a character that does have all of his previous incarnations within his head, and throughout this story we are dealing with a version of the 11 that has basically had all of his personalities almost taken away from him, which is effective, but also at the same time does take away one of the major aspects of his character. That could be seen as quite a risk. However, when you have an actor such as Mark Bonnard fulfilling the role of this character, I think he does a very good job of actually developing the 11 himself, as opposed to the other incarnations that this character has been in the past. You certainly get to know the 11 a little bit more, and generally I just love Mark Bonnard's way of acting, and of course naturally when the other personalities do come back, he is as brilliant as ever. We've got the psychotic number 6, we've got the rather calm number 1, and we've got all of the other incarnations in there as well, including some nice references to the previous stories that we've seen throughout this series, but also there's this wonderful piece of sound design at the very beginning where we have Mark Bonnard talking, and then you kind of go inside his head, so there is a muted version of the audio of Mark Bonnard talking behind, and then there's the other personalities within his head talking at the same time, so you can kind of get this impression of the characters inside his head actually commentating on what he is currently doing, and it is a really cool way to actually present the character, especially within the audio drama format. And I imagine that this is one of those things that does actually work more effectively on audio as opposed to what it would within the visual format. As for the actual story itself, the 8th Doctor wants to help out the 11 and basically take him to the equivalent of a hospital for him to get treatment over his schizophrenic-style Time Lord issues. So he wants to go there, seek treatment, and the Doctor wants to help him along the way. However, naturally, of course, the hospital that they go to throughout this story has fell under a little bit of trouble. I'm not really going to mention much about the actual alien for this story. All I will say is that it hunts by sound, and that makes for some very interesting sound design choices throughout this story, including the characters whispering for the majority of the runtime, which you would think that would get on your nerves after a while. However, I think it does work incredibly well. However, at the same time, the benefit around this story is that, especially when following on from Ravenous 3, is you have this character focus throughout this episode. You have the development of Liv disliking the 11 and basically not trusting him whatsoever, and then you have the overly too trusting 8th Doctor, and then you have Helen, who has had that pre-existing relationship with the 11 at the earlier half of Ravenous, meaning that she feels personally connected to him, and that makes for some really intense scenes, especially between the 11 and Liv, and also the relationship between Liv and Helen, as well as the Doctor trying to get involved within this and trying to teach his companions essentially how to be like him, be a little bit more careful caring, when in the reality of all things, Liv is the one that is right, Liv is the one that is not trusting the 11, and at the end of the day, we know that inevitably the 11 is going to turn around and be evil, and it's just a matter of time of when he is going to do that, and the Doctor is kind of just a little bit naive about everything. Very much like Ravenous 3 and Ravenous 2, this box set does continue to develop the relationship of this rather unique TARDIS team, and by this point I'm thoroughly enjoying both Liv and Helen as companions, as well as Mark Bonnard as the 11. I think that Paul McGann as the Doctor also does a very good job as well, in a more doctorly role as opposed to the previous stories. So now moving on to the second episode of the box set, we have Planet of Dust, as written by Matt Fitton once again. Now this story is much more linking to the actual plot arc itself, and it does of course feature the return of Geoffrey Beevers as the decayed Crispy Master. Now this story is much more traditional in its Doctor Who roots. We have the Doctor arriving on this planet, where the Master has arrived beforehand, and basically he has become the equivalent of a dictator on this planet. However, in this story, he is known as the Provider, and what I really like about Matt Fitton's style of writing is that it just gets straight to the point. We know that the Decayed Master is going to be in this story, so we don't really waste any time of presenting him. He's almost there immediately, and of course the 11 is also involved within this story as well, as we have this very interesting moment at the end of the previous story, which once again is a learning curve for the 11, and we have the Doctor basically allowing the 11 to set the coordinates and have a request stop where he wants to be dropped off once again to seek treatment and to basically learn more about himself. However, naturally of course, this does backfire. So we basically end up, as the title of this episode suggests, on this barren dust world where we have these people who are living and they are struggling to basically live on a day-to-day basis due to the lack of water. And I think that if anything is to be improved upon when it comes to the narrative of this story, is that it would have been nice to maybe see these people on this planet struggling a little bit further, because I couldn't help but compare this story to the 8th Doctor Time War episode, The Famished Lands. And I thought that that episode did a very good job of showing devastation, of showing famine, and showing people struggling to get by, having the struggle of resources to get food and water. And I kind of feel that maybe this story avoids that. It's not necessarily a focus, we just have the Master restricting the amount of water that these people can have. We have a few people requesting more water, however of course naturally the Master decides to not give them it because he's evil and horrible. But at the same time, it would have been nice to see that struggle. It would have been nice to get to know the personalities of the people on this planet a little bit further, because instead, and arguably more importantly in fact, we have a more focused story based on that of the Master and the 11, and this brilliant moment where they meet for the first ever time, which caught me off guard, because I don't know why. I think it might be because both of them are renegade Time Lords, and both of them are quite evil in their approach to everything and anything. I kind of already felt like the Master and the 11 have met beforehand. However, this story, they meet arguably face to face for the first ever time, and we get this brilliant moment between Geoffrey Beevers and the 11. It's just incredibly cold and calculating, especially when you have the context of the Decayed Master in this story, who is a little bit more calculating but still weaker compared to the other Masters, because he is essentially a walking corpse and is about to drop to the ground, because he is on his last legs and he's requesting basically, or trying to find, eternal source of life. So we have a much weaker version of the Beevers Master. However, at the same time, a brilliant way that Geoffrey does in fact portray the role is, even though he is incredibly weak, he still feels incredibly evil and incredibly powerful. To me, when I was listening to this story for the first ever time, I was struggling to see where it was going to go, how it was going to link to the overall plot arc of the box set itself. However, once you reach the midpoint of this story, it kind of takes a different approach, and we kind of start to see a more direct reference to the overall plot arc itself, where essentially everything hits the fan and we have this moment where things turn upside down. The Doctor is essentially personally attacked. We get this absolutely phenomenal moment within the later half of this story. At the same time, you have the return, naturally as you would expect, of the Ravenous within this story, doing a very good job of making them feel like a threat, especially considering that that has been built up throughout the previous box sets as well. I think that this story, and in particular the first episode of The Day of the Master as well, does a very good job of establishing the Ravenous as an actual threat that the Doctor and the Time Lords do actually fear. They feel like a horror type of monster. They feel like something that is deadly, and I can't help but compare them to the sort of Demogorgon creatures from Stranger Things, because they feel brutal. They will kill anything providing that it is a Time Lord, and they will suck this life energy out of them, and they kind of sound a little bit like the Demogorgon as well. So very much, once again, the sound design does a very good job of making them feel like such a menacing threat, and that is certainly seen throughout the later half of this story in particular. Then we move on to the series finale, two-part story, The Day of the Master, as written by John Dorney. Now these are the episodes that I always go into absolutely dreading, because we have this series finale of this grand 16-part epic, and in my eyes I just do not see how you can make a fully satisfying ending out of a story that has previously had already 14 hours, arguably more, of plot development beforehand. It just seems almost impossible to be able to wrap that into a neat package, especially when the story is around 2 hours long. And I think especially when you've got a two-part story with all these different characters to balance as well, including the different incarnations of the Master, a rather large TARDIS team, the Ravenous and the 11, and many other different references in there as well, it does certainly feel like a very big task, to say the least. However, I think that Ravenous 4 does certainly do a very good job. It certainly, in my opinion, does a better job than Doom Coalition, because one of the big issues with Doom Coalition in my eyes was that it bitten off far too much. It couldn't really develop the amount of stuff that it was trying to within the small amount of time that it was given. I think that Doom Coalition very easily could have been extended for an additional probably 3 box sets, and even then it would have been hard to get a satisfying ending. I think that Ravenous, due to having a few standalone stories in there, the plot arc itself has been a bit more relaxed, and it's been a bit easier to follow. We've not really had too much timey-wimey stuff going on, even though there is a little bit of that within this story, but at the same time I encourage newer listeners to listen to Ravenous more than Doom Coalition, and it is just a shame that you do kind of need the origins of the 11 from Doom Coalition in order to fully understand Ravenous. However, as I say, I think that Day of the Master is a great story, and by far the best thing about this episode is that interaction between the different incarnations of the Master. Of course, you have Derek Jacobi, you have Eric Roberts, seen throughout the first ever time of the 8th Doctor since the movie back in 1996, and then of course, rather excitingly, you do also have Michelle Gomez as Missy, an incentive for new series fans. The interactions between the different Masters is kind of the same novelty that you do get from a multi-Doctor story. You have those different squabbles and personality clashes that you would come to expect. However, you have Derek Jacobi almost taking the leader role. There is this excellent moment where he appears and he basically has many different scenes with Livchenko, and the moments between them, as soon as he arrives and steps outside of his TARDIS, he is absolutely owning the stage. And I just think I absolutely adore the War Master, because everything about his character is phenomenal, and I think that that's been represented very well throughout all of his different cameos that he's had, not just throughout within his own series, but also the different box sets that he has been in as well. So by far for me, one of the best things about certainly Day of the Master Part 1 is Derek Jacobi, and that kind of goes into Part 2 as well. Naturally, in a very similar way to Doom Coalition, we have the Doctor and his companions separated out. You have the end of the previous episode where Helen gets separated from the Doctor and Liv. She's in fact with Missy, and then you have the 8th Doctor and Liv together, and both of them soon get separated, and of course Liv goes off with the War Master, and the Doctor goes off to do a thing that I'm not going to talk about because that is related to the entire plot arc of this box set that I'm not going to spoil. I think that Liv once again does a very good job of standing on her own 2 feet. She's a very powerful character, and I think that if anything, the early scenes of this box set certainly nicely present the relationship between the 8th Doctor and Liv. They've came a very long way together, and I feel like their relationship is incredibly strong. And likewise for Helen as well. She's been adopted by Missy because of course she is a translator from the 1960s, and she wants some help with something that I'm not going to mention in order to contribute to the overall plot arc that is then later made sense of within the second half of the episode itself. So Doctor, as I say, is a bit timey-wimey in a Doom Coalition way, but I think when you have a TARDIS team as large as this one, you need to separate out the Doctor and his companions in order to do different things in different locations, in order to make full use of the time that you've got and the characters that you're meant to utilise throughout this story as well. I think that Eric Roberts, it's nice to see him have an interaction with the 8th Doctor. There is a great scene where they do of course meet up again, and it does very much feel like that one anchor that the 8th Doctor has got to the TV show, because everything about the 8th Doctor era on audio is brand new. Because we have the 8th Doctor himself, we have his TARDIS, and that is it. Those are basically the only two things that are in the movie that are also used within audio. Of course, they can't really use Grace. I believe they got around it somehow a few years ago. However, they've not been able to bring Grace back officially. So seeing Eric Roberts and the 8th Doctor back together again is a really nice novelty, and if you are a fan of the movie, then it would be something that is certainly up your street. However, it's nothing really too overplayed. I think that it's kind of just dealt with as a thing that's there. He's like any other incarnation of the Master throughout this story. He's not really any more special than the other Masters, he's just there because he is another version of the Master. And he works well. I think that maybe Eric Roberts doesn't work too well on audio compared to that of Derek Jacobi. I think that he kind of has one tone in his voice, and that is basically it, which is, to be honest, very similar to the movie itself, but overall it was okay. Missy as well, her normal comedic self. I think that John Dorney does an incredibly good job of writing her. I actually needed to double check if he had any writing credits within the Missy series box set. That was of course released earlier on this year, and he did in fact write one of my favourite episodes from that box set, so I think that if Missy does return in another format anytime soon, it will be nice to see maybe Dorney script that story as well, because he gets a good idea of her comedy and of her comedic style being very different to all the other Masters. And of course we have the overarching theme of these two stories, which is relating to the Ravenous themselves in a very personal way, and it only really makes sense in this story given the context of the Ravenous. They are of course essentially a tale, a horror tale, very suited to, in fact, considering we're now in October, very Halloween in their design of course, because they're like clown creatures, but they are basically Gallifreyan dark tale myth in a way, and it's kind of makes sense to go back to the very origins of Time Lord myth society within this story in order to get a full grasp of character. So in a way, this story is the end of the Ravenous, but also at the same time the beginning. So this series kind of creates itself in a way that only Doctor Who could do. One of the risks of having a 16-part series is because you've got so much plot point to play with, you've got so many different potential endings, and I certainly went into this box set with a much different approach of what I would have done as a series finale as opposed to what we actually got. And that's not to say that I'm disappointed, it's just to say that I kind of had an alternative ending in my head, and that is the thing. I kind of came out of this story, I can't say what I want to say for spoilers, but I'm trying to think of a way to say it. It's kind of like I wanted more impact from this final. I wanted the 8th Doctor to be ripped apart. I wanted an end for this Doctor to then fade directly into the Time War. I wanted some depressing, dark stuff to happen for this Doctor to basically lose it, end off at the very end, travelling alone into the Time War, into the heart of it, that would then link within to the Time War series. We didn't really get that. We kind of got an open bookend, not in the way that there's lots of things to finish off or anything like that. I can't really think of anything that there is major to finish off. I think if anything, this box set does do a good job of wrapping up the Ravenous plot arc, as well as a few loose ends from Doom Coalitions, the way it is a finale for both series as a whole, so it's certainly an end for the 8th Doctor era, but at the same time, it wasn't the end that I was expecting, and let's just say there is potential to have a further extension of more box sets, more quadrilogies, which I don't quite know. I was going to say if I want that. I do want that because it's Paul McGann, but I don't quite know if it's right for this Doctor. I kind of feel by this point we should be going into the Time War, and we shouldn't have more quadrilogies. We're kind of at a point now where any other box sets would kind of feel like they're avoiding the Time War. But I suppose, in the sense of the Time War, only time will essentially tell. So overall, for the fourth and final box set of the Ravenous quadrilogy series, naturally if you've bought the previous three, then go and buy the other one, that only just makes sense. If you're wanting to get into the 8th Doctor series, then by all means, if you have like a whole bank loan to spend, go and buy Doom Coalition, go and buy Ravenous and go and enjoy it. I think it is such a brilliant, grand series with a lot of potential and a lot of impact and a lot of great characters, and by far for me the main highlights of this series are A, the TARDIS team, B, Derek Jacobi and the Masters, and also of course the 11. Mark Bonnard is by far, and the character of the 11 and the 9 and the 8 and all of the ones that we've met over the past two quadrilogies have been by far some of the most intriguing and brilliant Time Lord creations that Big Finish have ever made. I suppose if you are wanting to get into the 8th Doctor series, then by all means maybe start with Ravenous, just research Doom Coalition and the events of that beforehand, because this one and Ravenous as a whole is certainly more suited to the newer listeners as opposed to the complexity bombshell that is Doom Coalition. Who knows, maybe in a year or so time, maybe even 2 years, I may go back and revisit Ravenous as a whole, or maybe even Doom Coalition as a whole, kind of giving the opportunity for those people who want to listen to it spoiler-free to go listen to it, and then I may come back and do a video overlooking on the entire series, kind of lifting the spoiler embargo and talking about the series openly. But at this point, I think it would just be completely useless me talking about the entirety of the plot, because then there will be absolutely no point in you guys going and buying it. Although there is Paul McGann, so you can listen to him later on, as opposed to me, which, come to think of it, is probably quite a large benefit really. So thank you very much for watching this review. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions about the 8th Doctor adventures or Ravenous, please do feel free to leave them in the comments section below, and I will of course try my best to answer them at some point in the near future. I do of course stay tuned on The Host Productions every single month for brand new Big Finish content and many reviews of the new releases, and of course other Doctor Who content every single week as well. So thank you very much for watching, stay safe, have a nice day, I shall see you all next time. Bye for now.